We don't face imposter syndrome by just coming in and doing the same thing every day. We face imposter syndrome when we go try to change and tap into our peak potential. And it is one of those limiting things that will just hit us so often and take us down and keep us from ever moving forward. How do I make sure this never happens again? And it really set me down a journey of self-discovery, being able to tie it back and understand the parts about what had happened in my life, not as a victim, like, oh my gosh, this happened, it's terrible, right? But okay, this is the reality. This is simply the reality in which I'm in. And what am I going to do from it, from this space?
Hi, John. Welcome to the show.
Mark, so glad to be here.
Welcome to Peak Performance Perspective, where we help entrepreneurs master health, wealth, and relationships. Now, as a person who works and brings out peak performance through breathwork, psychology, and mindset, what does peak performance mean to you?
Such a great question. And to me, it's not just about doing our best at any moment. I feel like it is absolutely the ability to live our life at the best that we can throughout life, right? It's a practice of mindfulness, it's a practice of observation, it's a practice of growth. And it's really just something that integrates day-to-day life that you're living and you're embodying.
This is a wonderful thing to talk about and think about. But when it comes to real life, everybody listening to this is thinking, I know I need to do this. I just don't know how to do this because the minutia of life is getting in the way. So, what are the first steps that someone can take to get on this journey of performance?
Yeah, so I think that the absolute first one that comes to mind, and people a lot of times we like to disqualify ourselves before we even begin, right? Because we look at somebody and say, I don't have time for that. I don't have the energy for that. I don't have the money for that. Here's all the reasons why I can't do something. But I really believe that peak performance starts by simply a practice of awareness, of mindfulness, of being aware of how we're doing, how we're responding, and accepting the fact that we have a choice in how we respond in any moment. One of my favorite quotes by Viktor Frankl, and I never quite get it right, so I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but he says that in between stimulus and response, there is a pause. And it's in that pause, in that space, that we have the freedom to choose. And that is where our true freedom in our life comes about, is by breaking free of the knee-jerk Pavlovian response that we can live our lives under so often, and being able to see that we have the chance to respond in a different way. And sometimes that response may be, I can tell you when I first started doing this, it was like 3 years later, 3 months later, and I'm like, I could have handled that differently, right? But you get better and better in being able to start making different choices closer and closer to when that stimulus originally occurs.
So, what do you think is the difference in between somebody who notices this and acts upon it, while someone who just goes through life without even realizing it exists?
Yeah, the difference is the intentionality in growth, the intentionality in making a choice, the ability to actually apply a practice and test it as a theory and see how it comes back, as opposed to just blindly going through something. It's amazing because outside of our personal growth, right? We'd be insane to go into business and say, I'm just going to do a bunch of things and see what happens and what feels good and what doesn't feel good. And let's see what comes out at the end of it. Let's look back 10 years later, right? We'd be bankrupt. We'd absolutely be bankrupt. It would never happen. But in our lives, we can do that so often. And we look back and it's literally, we'll look back at 5 years or a decade. And it is the same feeling that we'll have when we wind up in the parking lot at work in the morning and go, how the heck did I get it? Like, I don't remember anything from walking out the door to getting at this spot. And we can wind up in that same space for our lives where we look back 5, 10 years later and go, how the heck did I wind up here? What the heck happened? Right. And what's amazing is the ability to start working with people that are ready, that are at that spot and ready to be, hey, let me do something about it. I never want that to happen again. Right. Let's do something about this.
Before becoming a breathwork and performance coach, you were a Fortune 100 tech leader.
Yeah.
What happened in life that sparked this transition?
I love that question because it's not exactly your typical path. And what really happened was I had been and doing a lot of work. One of the things that happened, I have done a lot of research to determine how our childhood impacts our relationships, right? It impacts our relationships with other people. It impacts our relationships with ourselves. It impacts our relationships with God. And even outside of knowing that, without any awareness around it, I wound up in a very abusive marriage and stayed in it for 25 years. And when we got divorced, when the kids went to college and we got divorced, and finally things came to a head, and I was like, what the heck happened? How did I wind up in this space? How do I make sure this never happens again? And it really set me down a journey of self-discovery, being able to tie it back and understand the parts about what had happened in my life, not as a victim, like, oh my gosh, this happened, it's terrible, right? But okay, this is the reality. This is simply the reality in which I'm in. And what am I going to do from it, from this space? And so that led to a variety of different things that I explored, and breathwork being one of them that is just integrated so well into my life, and then also being able to share that with others.
So while you were going through this experience that led you to breath and finding other solution, was there a specific moment or an event that triggered this? Or was it just a slow realization that at some point that the water just reached a certain level and spilled over?
Yeah, it was really, there's a few moments, right? We can always look back and see these different moments that occur. For me, I like to joke the thing that really shifted the biggest change in my life was, yeah, I can be a little stubborn. And so I like to joke that God took a 2x4 to the back of my head. I literally wound up on a kitchen tile looking up with blood coming out of the back of my head. I had passed out, I had gone down, and had paramedics coming in to strap me to a board to cart me out of the kitchen and into the hospital for x-rays. Everything was fine. I wound up with a number of stitches in the back of my head, but it took that moment, that level of intensity, to get me on a path that allowed me to start seeing where my life was at and begin to start making changes at that moment.
If you had to go back and redo it and not have to rely on a literal 2x4 on your head from God that puts you on the floor and makes you bleed, what could have been some other moments that could have possibly started this transformation for you?
I'm not going to answer that question because I can play armchair, right? I can play armchair quarterback all day and go back and lift this or that, right? But what I will do is share what I've learned going forward, because I can't go back and change the past. That simply is what it is. But I can extract the wisdom out of it and say, how do I learn going forward from this space? So what I have done and incorporated in my life to prevent another spiritual 2x4 to the back of my head has really been one of, there's two things. One I'm just starting to explore, and one I've learned and integrated very seriously. So the first one is really one of pausing, and it is building intentional mindfulness, pause, reflection into my day. This is tough. Right. This is tough because when we're type A personalities and we like to win and we like to succeed and we are driven, we can pack our day full of everything. And we now live in a space. I got on the elevator the other day, and the woman, there were two people in the elevator plus myself. The woman paused long enough to ask me what floor, because she was standing next to the button console. And then immediately these things came out. And everybody's down, just staring at this little screen. This little screen has replaced our entire life. You hear the analogy people saying all the time, the reason you aren't supposed to look back in your life and just spend all your time reflecting in your past is your rear view mirror is only about this big and your windshield is this big. Yet we have this entire world around us and we lock ourselves to this little tiny screen. So I found the practice of pausing, mindfulness, building in those pauses and an intentional time is so powerful, and being able to bring awareness. And that awareness is oftentimes all it takes, right? We can do all these other things to bring change about in our lives, but it is ultimately a moment of awareness of, I don't want to do this anymore, right? And boom, that's what initiates change in our lives. Everything else is just building up to that moment, that recognition. So that's number one. That's the building of intentional space. The second thing that I am just now starting to explore, but it has really been fascinating me over the past year, as a matter of fact, has been looking at the concept of surrender. And surrender is a dirty word, right? We are taught never give up, never surrender. Surrender is for the weak. We are here to conquer. And what I realized is there's two different types of surrender, and we really get ourselves locked into one, right? Now, when my brothers and I grew up, I'm the oldest of two brothers and a sister, and my brothers and I loved competition, right? We were all about just, how do we get out? How do we compete? How do we wrestle? We would literally, to my mom's dismay, after one Thanksgiving, we decided to all get up and start wrestling to prove who was stronger and better than the other person. And so we would devise all these holds to pin the other person down and twist their arm or hook them in a way and get them to surrender, get them to submit, get them to say, I give up. And that's how most of us live our lives, is that is the process of surrender, right? We are going to get the stew beat out of us until the point that we finally say, I give up, I'm ready to do something different. There's an entirely different concept to surrender, which is where we are able to surrender into what's actually the reality of the moment, right? Where we're actually able to surrender and see the part that is out of our control and the part that's in our control. We were catching up just before this broadcast, and you were sharing a little bit about nationals. And can I share this? Can I share this story?
Yes.
Yeah. So you were sharing the story about nationals, and you missed by 9 points, I think you said, right? You missed placing by 9 points. Your whole approach is one of, there's an element of surrender and there's an element of knowing exactly what your lane is and what you're going to do about it, right? And that's what's so powerful, because you're able to say, look, nothing I can do differently about what's occurred with this, but I know exactly what I need to do to go back. And what was fascinating is that you also shared the opportunity that came up with the storyline around it that wouldn't have happened otherwise, right? And so I think being able to explore that second part of surrender, which is where we're able to accept reality, we're able to open up that there's something much larger than us that we are a part of, really also allows some absolute magic and beauty to unfold in our lives.
No, this is brilliant. The reason I asked this question is because there are people listening to this who are struggling with something, who are suffering with something. And we don't want them to get to a point where they're on the floor. If we can give them the tools that they can start analyzing now. I love what you said about pausing. But for those listening, can you explain, what does this pausing look like? Is it meditating, having an empty mind? Is it some type of question, some type of reflection? What are we doing during that pause?
Yeah, that's so great, because this pause can be just anything, right? What I teach and what I do myself as my practice is just a moment to pause and breathe a very specific way, breathing very specifically into our diaphragm. And we can talk about that, and I can walk through an example. But being able to get to a space where I allow myself to breathe without any intentionality at all, other than just simply focusing on the breath. And what happens in that case is it pulls me back. Number one, it pulls me back into the moment, right? We spend so much of our time focused on what's happened in the past, what might happen in the future, right? We get so wrapped up anywhere but where we actually are at this moment. And there is a power in coming back to the moment that we're in, being fully present in the moment. And then the second thing is, and this is specifically because I work with a lot of men, one of the things that I've learned with men is a lot of times you'll do that pause and that's enough. Something will come up in your mind and you'll notice something and you'll be able to unravel it and open it and explore it. But a lot of times you can find your mind still running, right? And I'm still trapped in this loop, even though I'm focusing on the breath. The thing of whatever is stuck in my mind on a fast speed and then rewind. And so this is where I love to get into body exploration. I love to get into focusing on the sensations that we have in our body and just bringing our awareness there, which I find often bypasses a lot of our defenses and allows us to get into something that we do need to be paying attention to, that will block ourselves, right? Our ego will block us from paying attention to it otherwise. So that's a great practice that I work with clients on, as well as is that exploration. And all of this process, anywhere from 30 seconds to 5 minutes. And it's really just the ability to see when you're starting to go off track and when you need to incorporate that pause.
Entrepreneurs in general struggle with stress management, and that stress affects our decision making. I always thought of it as walking around drunk, semi-drunk. How stressed I am equivalent to how many beers I had. And after a certain amount of beers, I can walk in a straight line. Can you explain the neuroscience behind breath work that impacts and making and stress management for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. The first thing to keep in mind when we do this is that we have a very natural physiological response to stress. And this response to stress is evolutionary and it has a very good purpose behind it. So if we think even 10,000 years ago, right, where civilization is a lot less advanced, there's a lot more wild spaces in the world than we have today, right? And we're walking through the woods by ourselves or maybe with a group of one or two people, and all of a sudden we're surrounded by a pack of wolves, right? And I'm not talking like what we think we see coyotes, right? I'm talking if you've ever seen a real wolf on video, those things are big. And now you got a pack of them, right? And you are now all of a sudden no longer just at the apex. You're realizing that distance between you as an apex predator and everyone else is a lot smaller than you thought it was. And our bodies created a response to that through fight or flight that's very powerful at that moment. Because at that point, I do want to either be fully mobilized with everything I have to fight off the attack that's about to happen, or I want to be fully mobilized to run as quickly as I can and escape that situation. And in fact, and that's hyper arousal. That's the realm of emotional response that is called hyper arousal or physiological response. And even the other side, we have hypo arousal where we withdraw, we shut down. Sometimes you'll see people that are just like almost comatose in their response. But again, there's an evolutionary aspect behind this, because if I was seriously injured in a fight like that, my best hope for survival would be to shut everything down, right? My mind has got to disconnect from the pain, completely shut down as many bodily systems as possible, and hope somebody finds me and I can get help that would allow me to recover, right? In fact, this is exactly what happens to a gazelle on the Serengeti. The moment before you see a lion take down a gazelle, the gazelle will just complete withdraw, go to complete hypoarousal, shut down, withdraw. And even if the lion doesn't attack them, they'll be there for a while and then shake it off and move on. So evolutionary, we have these reasons why we respond to stress the way that we do. They were meant to be short term. They were meant to help with our survival. And we were meant to then be able to release and move on from them, which is what happens in nature. Right? What happens though is now we're in a situation where these no longer serve us, number one, right? So when we're told the report is late or a deal has fell through, we do not need the same evolutionary response as a pack of wolves or a hungry bear facing us on the other side. And we also tend to fire this off at the same time. So if our partner's telling us that their mom's moving in with us for 6 months, we don't need the same evolutionary response that we had before. So that's the first start, is this is the evolutionary response that we're working with. And we want to work on redirecting that as opposed to just shutting that down, right? So acknowledging, that's the first step, I think, is acknowledging that response and what's going on there.
How does your way of doing breath work, incorporating things from all these disciplines, differ from other breathwork techniques or mindfulness practices?
Yeah, so what I've done specifically is built what I call the BPM framework. So if we think about BPM, I was doing it in response to stress. Heart rate goes up, beats per minute go up. So it's a simple acronym and it's something that we can build on. So the B stands for breath, right? And again, it's acknowledging we have this physiological response and we want to redirect it. So the first thing that I do is we use the breath in a way to signal from our body to our brain that we're safe. So we have a particular breath that we do, we signal that it's safe. So that begins to free up this hijack that's happened in our brain through the evolutionary response that literally shuts down our prefrontal cortex. It shuts down our executive decision making. So breath is the first piece that starts to release this hijack. Physiology's next, that's the P. So there is a strong connection between not just our mind and our body telling our body how to react, but our body and our mind impacting our mindset. There was a study in the UK that was done that was fascinating to me. They took clinically depressed individuals, they put them in front of a mirror and told them to smile for 10 minutes each day. And they found out that smiling, and remember, these are clinically depressed people, smiling in the mirror for 10 minutes each day was as effective as Prozac in combating depression. So think about that. Your physiology, what you were doing was as effective as a pharmaceutical, changing your state of mind. So physiology is the next piece. And we use physiology in a way to double down and release that hijack that's occurred. And then mindset's the third. So now that we've done two physiological responses from the body to the mind, now we can start to shift the mindset and tap into what we need to change there.
The new year is coming up. During the new year, many people make new resolutions. And one of the resolutions that most people end up making are around their health and fitness. As a result, the first 4 weeks in a gym, any gym, is the most crowded it ever is. For those of us who are into health and fitness, we understand that it's not going to the gym that makes you fit, it's really the diet industry, there are a lot of myths. As someone who builds leaders with better management, stress management tools, right? Because one of your famous quotes is that successful people don't have less stress, they have better stress management tools.
That's right.
When you look at the myths that are around stress management right now, how most people go about it in a conventional way, what are some of these myths?
Yeah, I love this question because one of the myths that I run into all the time is that willpower alone is going to get you to de-stress, right? What happens to most of us when we get stressed? We start the mind chat, right? We start the mind chatter of don't get stressed, don't do this, calm down. You're not going to let this bother you. Let it go. What we do is we respond to stress, which is a physiological response, with mind chatter alone. The myth being that we can use our mind simply to overcome the rest of the stress response. And that is about as effective as a 6-year-old girl standing in front of an 800-pound gorilla telling that 800-pound gorilla what to do, right? It just doesn't work. So that is myth number one that I've run into all the time, is that people have fooled themselves into thinking that they can use their mind and telling themselves to calm down to overcome this evolutionary response. And it flat out doesn't work. The second thing that I have seen is that people will then disconnect. So what happens is, I'm just going to turn this off. I'm just going to disconnect from whatever I'm feeling. I'm going to disconnect, become a machine, and move on. And this is the second big myth that I see, is people like to believe that they are logical beings that sometimes have fits of emotions. And the reality is we are emotional beings that sometimes have fits of logic. And if you do not understand that, and you do not understand the power of emotion, you don't understand how that works, you are just setting yourself up long-term for failure. And the third myth I've run into all the time is the myth of willpower. I touched on it a little bit at the beginning, but people believe that they can just will their way through something. And it's really fascinating. I know you and I, when we met a few months ago, and you had shared, we were chatting, and you had shared the idea for overcoming imposter syndrome, which I went and recorded the following week and built that course based on your advice, right? And so one of the things I was able to really reinforce in that course is that willpower alone is really insufficient. In fact, it drains our ability for higher, the science has shown it drains our ability to make higher level decisions. But when we shift our identity, which is one of the ways that I use breathwork so powerfully, when we shift our identity, the studies have shown it's almost 50% more effective than willpower alone by shifting the beliefs and the identity that we have around something. So those are three of the big myths that I like to bust all the time with clients.
Oftentimes, we see that when we are trying to level up, even though we have the tactical skill set and the knowledge and the tools and the people that will help us, what holds us back is trauma that has happened in the past. Or sometimes what holds us back is this constant pushing that has brought us to a burnout stage that we're just not willing to accept. Tell us a little bit about how breathwork can help address issues like trauma and burnout in leaders and work as a performance enhancer.
Yeah, I love the awareness around trauma, because I think you described two situations. One is trauma and one is constantly pushing ourselves to perform. But I believe they're two sides of the same coin. And all of it's rooted in what's going to keep me safe. Sometimes the belief in safety is I have to avoid something. Sometimes the belief in safety is I have to be in command of something. So, right. But it's all driven with, if I go to this space, I won't be safe. If I release control or push myself for one moment, I won't be safe. And all of that comes down to an underlying trauma a lot of times, or a belief of not being safe in a certain area. So what's really cool with the breath work, and especially the breath work I do, which is trauma-informed breath work, and we're getting into rebalancing the autonomic nervous system. We are rebalancing your sympathetic, which is your fight or flight, with your parasympathetic, which is your rest and digest, or create and procreate, right? The more creative side. And as we do that, a lot of times these deep-seated beliefs, these deep-seated emotions, areas that people had just racked over so many times to prevent that trauma from escaping out, we're able to really get in and effectively work with it. And there are some just amazing stories of people I've worked with that have just made some deep shifts as a result of that, myself included, obviously getting to some of those core underlying beliefs.
What are some of your favorite questions to ask top executives, entrepreneurs, to help them break through those mental barriers? I know it's a broad question, but for somebody listening to it, what are some initial questions they can start asking themselves to really understand and diagnose what's happening and what they need to do to move forward?
I don't have any specific questions per se, but I will say the biggest thing that I train is that practice of mindfulness, that ability to pause and that ability to slow down, because it seems counterintuitive sometimes that in order to speed up, I have to be able to slow down. But we can make change a lot more difficult than it really is. And in fact, I think that a lot of times when we get in the mind and we're talking about something and we're focusing so much our mind on it, what we do is we just continue to reinforce the same problem, right? Because we're just rotating around in our mind again and again. And it's almost like we're strengthening this thing the more that we analyze it and we talk about it and we review it. So I really love to get right into a breathwork session. We'll set this up front and we'll talk about the goal that we want to achieve, or we'll talk about an awareness that's come about. But then we'll get into the breathwork session and we'll use that in a way to explore at a level that is really just what I love about breath is it gets you into the state that you're really in a, if you're familiar with brainwaves, you're in that theta brainwave. It's almost like a light sleep, a really meditative state. And we're able to work with things really effectively in there. And then that's where the questions can come up. That's where different things come up. But it's very much attuned to the client and the experience, in particular, what we're focusing on that time. So really my start with the mindfulness, start with the pause, start with the awareness.
Once someone has started doing breath work, how do you help them stay on track? Because a lot of the executives are laser focused on just the bottom line. And we know we are almost always willing to do things for others that we're not willing to do ourselves, and we prioritize last, right? So here's our numbers and money, that bottom line, and then I don't matter. I'll take care of it some other day. How do you help them realize the importance of this and help them stay on track?
Yeah, so when I work with people, I work with them in a three ways. So tactically is what we've been talking about. How do we redirect that stress response? How do we regain control very tactically in a situation, right? And this is something that people tend to see immediate improvements in because they're able to see, oh yeah, okay, I was able to reground. I was able to regain control. I was able to refocus. I was able to see opportunities that, 3 months ago, something similar happened and I was just locked and spinning for the rest of the day. They can see a very immediate response when we work with them tactically. Now, the second way is strategically. And to your point, that one's a little bit harder, right? Strategically, the gains are that you're able to handle more chaos, more adversity. You're able to handle more disruption in your life. It's going back to successful people don't have less stress. They just have better stress management techniques. But this one is hard. If I say, Mark, I'm going to give you these gains, but you've got to go and do 10 minutes of breath work every single day for the next 3 months to get these gains, and you're going to go, yeah, I got other things to do, right? You wouldn't, but a lot of people do, right? A lot of people go, no, I just don't have the ability to do that. So I really like the third way that I work with people is to shift these limiting beliefs. So we're working in a session and we're shifting limiting beliefs and we're shifting them at the core. And what I've really found is by doing the limiting belief work, combined with the tactical work, people they start to use breath as a kit and it becomes an innate part of what they're doing. And that's where the strategic gains start to come about. Not because they've set apart between 7:05 and 7:15 every morning, I'm going to do this exact breath work, but because they make this part of their regular practice working together, it just becomes a tool. And because it's a tool they return to, then their body knows the path, their mind knows the path, and they get those strategic gains.
You talked about some limiting beliefs that you encounter working with top executives and peak performers. You talked about how some of them are the mindset, I always have to be in control. And some of them are like, things are just happening to me, I'm never in control. What are some other limiting beliefs that you find most common amongst top executives and entrepreneurs?
A big one that comes up is one around self-judgment. I should be further along by now. I should have done more by now. I should have accomplished more by now. And that one's a treadmill you'll get on because it's like you've accomplished so much. Yes, but I should have done more. And so there's a healthy appetite in wanting more, but when your appetite consumes you rather than your appetite being a guide, right? Now we're getting in an imbalanced situation, right? It's the difference between going, I'm hungry, let me choose a meal that's in my strategy and my plan that's good for me, and I'm hungry, let me go to the vending machine, grab a bag of chips because I'm going to just unconsciously satisfy this urge that's come up. And really, I think the ability to bring awareness to the stuff, to be able to not just choose these knee-jerk reactions, that's where we're able to really make significant change and make it part of perpetual change for them.
What do you tell someone? Because you're so right. This is so common amongst peak performers. Yes, I'm great. How far I've come, I should have done more. What do you tell someone when they have that mindset?
It's not so much a matter of telling them, but it's a matter of getting them to experience something different, right? So when we're doing breathwork sessions and we're working together, if they have an awareness of even the awareness of, and again, what'll happen is people often come to me for one thing, right? And that's what we'll work on. But then other things start to come up. And rarely is it, I came in for A, I got A answered, I'm out, right? You're very familiar with this, right? I came in for A, and all of a sudden it's like all these other things things start coming out. And here's the one that's really the big issues that's been driving our life and taking away our freedom. And so again, getting into the breathwork sessions and working on that one topic, but then being able to see what unfolds, being able to explore that, and working with clients that are curious. That's really, I choose clients that are curious, that want to explore, that want to open, that are open to seeing that it may be just more than this one thing that's really going on and driving their life and impacting what they want to achieve.
Can you describe to the audience the typical experience someone has with you when they come to you with something like this, and what do they feel like? How do they feel at the end of the session?
Yeah, absolutely. Two different sessions. So I have a shorter session, a 30-minute session. I also have an hour-long session. The 30-minute session, what we're getting into is more of an autonomic nervous system reset. So what we're doing is we're getting in, we're rebalancing. It's more of I won't call it a quick fix, but we're allowing yourself to rebalance and experience a different perspective than you had 30 minutes ago. And so most of the time, what typically is told to me at the end of that is, wow, I dropped in really quickly. I feel energized and creative, but I also feel relaxed. It's almost like I'm at peak performance, right? I'm feeling really creative and ideas coming to mind, but I'm also not feeling this pressure. Like I don't have time, or I've got to get this done. So it's a great place of freedom for them to be at. Now, when we get into the hour-long sessions, which is where I like to work with limiting beliefs, it is, believe it or not, actually very closely simulates, if anyone's ever done plant medicine, something like that, it very closely simulates that. So what we're doing is we're going through a period of relaxation. We're then doing breath, which, believe it or not, our brain makes all these same pharmaceuticals, right? Our body will manufacture DMT. Our body will manufacture all these different chemicals that will allow us to have this experience. It's just we're making it and it's going away at the end of the session. And then we get into a spot where it opens and I drop them deep into a meditative state. That's when we're able to work more with the limiting belief. And then at the end of that, I'm going to slowly bring them back into awareness and bring them back into the space. And then we're going to they're ready to go. Now, I always tell people, don't plan a board meeting, don't plan a really busy schedule right afterwards, because you're in this very creative, but very open space. And you may want to journal. You may want to use this time to just come up with creative ideas. But I'm consistently told, even with people who have just started with me, that they've never gone as deep in meditation as they have then with me guiding them through this breathwork technique.
If you were someone who was young and wanted to go to school for breath work, and you went to school for breath work and that's all you knew and that's all your practice, there would be nothing wrong with that. That would put you in a specific bucket of somebody who knows and has trained one thing and is talking about that one thing. But what's fascinating to me is that you don't come from this world. You found breath work as a solution to save your life because you belong to a different world. And I think that gives you perspective on people who need this tool in ways that perhaps somebody who's never experienced life on the other side can understand. But what's also most fascinating is that you were struggling, you researched, you found tool, you changed your life, but you didn't stop there. You realized the power of this tool, and then you put other things on top of it to even make it more powerful. And now you are on a mission to share that with the rest of the world. And that speaks incredibly about the type of person you are and how you carry your life out. So it's an honor and a privilege to have met you and having gotten a little glimpse into the thought processes and the mechanisms of breathwork and how you do work. Please tell our audience how they can connect with you, how they can learn from you. Anything else that you want to tell the audience the last second?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, Mark, I want to just acknowledge that and I received that. Thank you very much. I really appreciate the observation and the comment on that. People can absolutely find me. JohnHallCoaching.com is one way to find me on the internet. The other is just if you search John Hall Breathwork, and you'll also find me that way. And our conversation was just so powerful. We talked about overcoming imposter syndrome. And so I went and wrote that course. And what I do now is if you go to my website, I will give you free access to that course for, I think it's 2 months or maybe a month. I can't remember, but you'll get free access to that course in plenty of time to go through and complete those exercises and And what I loved about writing that course was when I thought about the people, like, who does this impact? Who faces imposter syndrome? And it is people who are looking to optimize and achieve the next level, right? We don't face imposter syndrome by just coming in and doing the same thing every day. We face imposter syndrome when we go try to change and tap into our peak potential. And it is one of those limiting things that will just hit us so often and take us down and keep us from ever moving forward. So I took your advice to heart, and that is what I'm offering people as well.
Love it. John, thank you so much for being on the show. You're a great human being, and I hope to talk to you soon again.
Mark, likewise, thank you so much for this opportunity.